The moment my sister Emma uttered those words, the clinking of silverware against porcelain stopped. The air in the dining room, once warm with the scent of rosemary chicken, suddenly became thin and cold. "You have 3 days to leave the house," she said, her smile a perfect, polished weapon. I looked across the table, past the flickering candlelight that made shadows dance on the walls. Mother stared intently at her mashed potatoes as if they held the secrets of the universe. My father, a master of strategic silence, simply reached for the salt. They were a jury that had already delivered its verdict. My own plate was untouched. I didn't flinch. Ooh. For years, I had been the family's silent shock absorber, the quiet engine that kept this house running while they lived their lives. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, my service for submission. They didn't know that while they were whispering on the porch, I was consulting with lawyers. While they were rearranging my life to make room for Emma's dramatic return, I was reorganizing my assets. I reached into the bag resting by my chair, my movements calm and deliberate. I pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder and placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. "Actually," I said, voice cutting through the tension like glass, "you all have 24 hours. Their forks didn't just drop, they clattered. Emma's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion that was deeply, profoundly satisfying. This reckoning wasn't born overnight. It was forged 3 years ago in the crucible of desperation. This very house, this monument to our family's supposed stability, was just days from being auctioned off on the courthouse steps. Dad's sure thing investment had vaporized his retirement, and Mom's medical bills were a mountain of paper and debt. And Emma was in Bali, curating her yoga influencer brand, posting filtered photos of sunsets, while I was calculating if we could afford to keep the heat on. I never burdened them with the terrifying details. I didn't tell them about the sleepless nights, the frantic calls to the bank, the sheer, wrenching fear of losing everything. I just acted. I drained my savings. I refinanced the mortgage, a complex and humiliating process that put my name, and my name alone, on the line. I took out a high-interest business loan, leveraging my freelance design portfolio as collateral. My guest room became a war room, where I fought a silent battle against foreclosure notices and overdue bills, often falling asleep to the glow of a spreadsheet. They never asked how the storm passed. They just noticed the sun was shining again and thanked God. Never the daughter who had single-handedly piloted them through the hurricane. I let them believe in miracles, because I wasn't doing it for their applause. I was doing it for the house itself, for the floral wallpaper from 1998, for the scorch mark on the deck from a reckless 4th of July, for the creaky third step that betrayed my midnight raids on the fridge. This place was the only home I had ever known, built not just of brick and mortar, but of memory and blood. I remember the day the deed was officially transferred. At the lawyer's office, parents' hands trembled as they signed the papers. "Are you sure about this, Evelyn?" the lawyer had asked, his eyes filled with a professional sort of pity. Dad just nodded, his voice thick. "It's the only way." The weight of that pen in my hand felt heavier than the house itself. It was an inheritance of responsibility, not a gift of privilege. That very night, Emma called for the first time in months, not to ask how we were, but to announce her engagement, describing the sapphire ring in excruciating detail. I didn't tell her that her childhood home now legally belonged to me, or that I'd been subsisting on instant ramen to make the first new mortgage payment. She wouldn't have understood. Or worse, she would have twisted it into another story where she was the victim of my quiet ambition. Growing up, Emma was the sun, I was the planet caught in her orbit. She was the star cheerleader, the valedictorian, the effortless golden child. I was the quiet one, The observer. The one who learned not to ask for anything so I wouldn't have to face the disappointment of being ignored. But I remembered everything. Every forgotten birthday. Every frantic call for help she let go to voicemail. Every time Mom would placate me with, "Don't be jealous, sweetheart. She's just busy." It was never jealousy. It was a deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. So, when Emma waltzed back through the front door 2 weeks ago, with her perfect hair and monogrammed luggage, her prodigal daughter act in full swing, I knew the piece was over. She'd left her fiancé, messy affair, she spun into a tale of her own resilience. Naturally, she came home to the one place she never lifted a finger to save. Dinner, she held court, her laughter too loud, her stories all about her. Dad's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. When I served the lemon tart I'd made, their favorite, Emma scoffed. "Still playing house, huh, Evie?" It was a tiny, poisoned dart, and as always, it found its mark. Her cruelty was an art form, subtle, deniable, and devastatingly effective. Within days, the old dynamics snapped back into place. Emma took the master bedroom to heal, while I remained in the guest room I'd been living out of for 3 years. "Don't make things tense," Dad warned me when I tried to establish a boundary. My existence was tense. My reminders about bills were tense, but Emma, flouncing around in silk robes and leaving a trail of chaos in her wake, was a breath of fresh air. The final crack in the foundation came one evening when I overheard them on the porch. "She's always been so rigid." Emma's voice drifted through the screen door. "She just holds on to things." Mom replied, her voice laced with wary apology. "Maybe it's time for her to find her own place." They hadn't come to heal. They had come to reclaim. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I went to my desk, opened that folder, and reviewed the architecture of my salvation: the deed, title transfer, the paid, in full mortgage statement, my name, my work, my home. Their love was conditional, based on my utility and my silence. Emma's was inherited, unconditional, and absolute. And in that moment, stopped being the quiet shadow and started sharpening my claws. Back at the dinner table, the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Emma finally broke it, her voice brittle. This isn't real." "Oh, it's very real," I said, sliding another document across the table. "This is the mortgage satisfaction notice. Dated 18 months ago. The day I paid off the final balance in full, with my own money." Dad's face went ashen. "I refinanced it." I continued, my voice gaining strength. "I paid the property taxes. I fixed the leaking roof you ignored. I dealt with the mold in the basement you pretended wasn't there. You probably don't remember." Irma shot up from her chair. "So this is about control?" "No." I corrected her, my gaze unwavering. "This is about respect. The respect you never gave me, the respect you tried to strip from me at my own table. You're kicking out your family." Mom whispered, her eyes finally meeting mine, filled with a horrified disbelief. "I am reclaiming what I built," I stated, turning to her. "What I held together while you let her walk in here and declare me a squatter." "You said nothing." "We didn't know," Dad mumbled. "You didn't want to know," I snapped, the years of suppressed anger finally finding a voice. "It was easier to believe the house ran on magic." Surprise. "I am the magic." Emma let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "God, Evelyn, no wonder you're alone. You're a martyr?" "I never asked for a parade," I said, rising to my feet. "But I will not be treated like a stranger in the house I own." I pulled the final document from my folder. "This is a formal notice of eviction. You have 24 hours. After that, I will have law enforcement escort you from the premises. The locksmith is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon." "You wouldn't dare." Emma spat. I looked her dead in the eye. "You dared first," Dad pleaded. "Evelyn, please. There has to be another way." There was, I said, my voice finally cracking. The other way was 3 years of my life. It was every dollar I earned, every night I didn't sleep. It was every time you told me you were proud of me, then let her erase me. You chose this way, me. You're not this kind of person. Mom whispered, tears welling in her eyes. No, I wasn't, I replied, strange calm settling over me. But you all taught me to be. Emma took a step toward me, defiant. This is our family home, not leaving. We both grew up here. I acknowledged. But I'm the only one who grew up enough to save it. Pack your things. Silence. Then, the sound of Emma's heels clicking like gunshots on the hardwood floor as she stormed upstairs. Dad buried his face in his hands. Mom just stared at me as if seeing me for the very first time. I didn't wait for her understanding. I walked back to my room and closed the door, my hand steady on the knob. I had just declared war on my family, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was free. The next day, the silence in the house was different. It wasn't the polite, suffocating quiet of before, it was a hollow, echoing void. By 11:40 a.m., they were gone. No dramatic goodbyes, just the soft click of the front door closing 3 separate times. At noon, I locked it. Sliding home was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I walked through the rooms, their absence a palpable presence. Didn't clean. I began a reclamation. I started in the master bedroom. I stripped the bed, opened the windows, and painted the walls a calm, steady gray. I took down the old family portraits, not to erase the past, but to put it in its proper place. I ripped out the dying rose bushes in the garden, and planted lavender and rosemary. Things that thrive with space and sunlight. Each act was a ritual. I fixed the creaky step. I turned the guest room into a real office, a space for my work, my future. Slowly, the house began to breathe with me. It stopped being a museum of their expectations and started being a home. A week later, an envelope arrived. Mom's loopy cursive. It wasn't an apology. It was a letter of forgiveness. She wrote that she forgave me for what I had done, that she hoped one day I would come to my senses. She said they still loved me, even if they didn't understand me anymore. I read it once, folded it neatly, and dropped it into the recycling bin. I didn't need their conditional love. I didn't need to be understood by people who never truly tried. For years, I had starved for their validation. Now, I was full. The silence in my house wasn't lonely. It was clarity. I sat by the window, a cup of tea in my hands, and watched the afternoon light spill across my new garden. Some stories don't need a happy ending. They just need a new beginning.